So here I have this to-do application that we have created in the CRUD video. If I make a build of this application, you can see for the home route, the first load.js is 138 kilobytes. So in this video, I'm going to show you different ways through which I can reduce the first load.js for this particular route. And we will also see how can we fetch data on the server side instead of doing that on the client side. That is also going to improve the performance of our application. Whenever you want to optimize your Next.js application, the first thing that you need to do is you need to install this package called Next Bundle Analyzer. After installing this package, you need to go to this next configuration file. And in this, what I'm doing here is I'm just importing this bundle analyzer. I'm calling this bundle analyzer by passing a configuration option. And I'm just saying that whenever this environment variable analyze is set to true, in that case, you're going to analyze the bundles. Otherwise, this is going to be disabled. And then I'm passing the rest of the next configuration to this bundle analyzer instance and then exporting this out of the file. So with this, I can now execute something like this. I can say analyze is equal to true, and then I can say pnpm build. So after executing that command, it is going to open 3 pages for me, as you can see over here. So in the first one, it is telling me all of the dependencies that are related with the server. Then we have this edge related page. So you can see we do not have anything related to edge environment. And then we can see this client.html, which tells you all of the client side dependencies, you could say, all of the client side bundles. Now at the top left side of the screen, you can see this arrow. I can click on this to open the sidebar. And then in this filter to initial chunks, I want to check all the chunks that are associated with the home page. So I'm going to choose that. And then we can see all of the chunks that are associated with the home page. And just to give you a little bit idea of what this app is all about, you can see, you can come here, you can come to home page. You can add your to-dos like this. You can edit them also. As you can see, you can delete any to-do. You get the idea, right? So here what I have done is I have chosen that file app.page, which is basically our home page file. And we can see all of these chunks that are associated with that particular route. Now, when you are in this page, you need to look at all of the big boxes that are present in this page. For example, immediately I can see that this is one of the really big boxes that I have. Then we have this very big, then we have this, and then we have this. And the rest of the things we can ignore, because if we optimize these things, it is going to have the biggest impact in terms of reducing the first load.js for this particular route. So let's try to understand these. Now, whenever you hover over any of these boxes, it is going to tell you some extra information about that particular chunk or module. So for example, if I hover over this, you can see in the path, you can see that this is related with Zod library. That means the code associated with Zod is also coming to the client side. That is one thing. Okay. And then if I hover over this, we can see that this is related with React dialog. So it's most likely associated with the dialog component that we have used from shadcn. And then here, if I hover over this, you can see that this is coming from React hook form. And then we have the Tailwind merge. So I think this is one of those dependencies which shadcn is using, right? And then we can also see something related to SWR. Okay. So that means we should be able to optimize some of these modules. Let's take a look at the code now. So if I go to home page, you can see that this is a server component by default. And in this server component, I am importing basically 2 things. We have this create to-do component, and then we have this to-do list component. If I go inside of this create to-do component, you can see this is actually a client component, right? And similarly, if I go to this to-do list component, you can see this is also a client component. Okay. That means our home page is basically a server component. And in this server component, we are trying to import 2 other components, which are client components. And the first load.js that you're seeing over here is all the JavaScript that your browser needs to download and parse to actually render that page properly and to make it interactive. So you could simply assume that this first load.js is actually coming from all of your client components. Well, not entirely, but most of it. Let me show you. If I come here and I just comment out these both to-do list and create to-do components like this, and then I make a build of my application, let's say normal build, you can see that the first load.js has been reduced to 87.2 kilobytes. So you could imagine that this contains all of the Next.js base code. And then apart from all of the extra things that we have, it was coming from these 2 components, create to-do and to-do list. Okay, that means we need to optimize these two components. So let's do these one by one. First, let's go to this create to do component. And in this create to do component, you can see that I am importing this button component from chat.cn. Then I'm importing this dialog component from chat.cn. I'm using these Zod resolver and use forms. So both of these are associated with the React hook form library. Then I'm using Zod to get the to-do schema and the type of to-do schema. And then I'm using use state from React. And I'm also using mutate from SWR, right? And finally, we are also importing this to-do form component that we have over here. Now, if you take a look at the diagram again, you can see that this dialog is one of the dependencies that we need to optimize. And since this is a client component, what I can do, I can actually import dynamic from next dynamic, more like this. And then I'm going to dynamically import all of these components. So let's call this dynamic dialog. So I'm going to call this dynamic function. This is going to accept two arguments. In the first argument, we are going to pass a callback function, which is going to return an import statement. And the component that we need to import, we know that it sits in the components UI dialog, right? But we do not get any default export out of this component. We only get named export. So the way that we are going to be getting just the dialog is by waiting for this. Like when this is available, we are going to just get the dialog instance. And in the second argument to this dynamic function, we are going to pass server-side rendering to false because we do not need server-side rendering. Similarly, you could imagine that I can import all of these, right? So we have imported all of these dynamic dialog content, dynamic dialog header, and then I can comment out this piece of code. And then I can use all of these in the JSX like this. Okay, let me repeat this again. So here's what we did. So we have basically removed the direct import statement for all of these components. And we have tell Next.js to import all of these components dynamically. Because we saw in this diagram that this dialog is one of the heavy dependencies. Okay, so at this time, if I try to create a build of my application, if I do pnpm build, let's see how much improvements we got in terms of the first load.js. Well, it looks like that the first load.js has actually increased this time. So previously it was around something like 138 kilobytes or something. And right now it is sitting at 139 kilobytes. So what actually happened? Well, the reason for that is pretty simple. First of all, we are now using this extra module dynamic, which was not part of this client component before. Okay. Second thing is, even though we have tell Next.js to import all of these dialog related components dynamically, these are also part of the client bundle because we have also used these in the another component called update to do, as you can see over here. And since this update to do is also part of this page file, because this update to do exists within this to do list component, as you can see over here, right? So that means it is still part of this specific route. So just by telling Next.js that you should import all of these components dynamically just in this create to do file is not going to help in this scenario. Let me show you. If I go to this home page and I remove this to do list component from here, that means now there are no more instances of that dialog present in the client side bundle. So this time we should be seeing a reduced first load.js in this case. So if I come here, make a build of my application, you can see that the first load.js has been reduced to 127 kilobytes, right? You get my idea. Okay, let's include this back. Now the approach that we're using right now to load all of these components dynamically within this client component is not the best approach. And there are multiple reasons for that. So if you take a look at the diagram again, you can see that we need to basically optimize a lot of these modules. So we need to optimize stuff related to Zod. We also need to optimize stuff related to this dialog, which we are already doing. And then we also need to optimize stuff related to this React hook form, right? We cannot do anything about this tailwind merge, at least at this point. And then we can also remove this SWR later in the video. So if I start optimizing my application at this level, I'm going to have problems. Let me explain. First of all, these optimizations will only be kicked in when this component is actually being rendered. Okay. But when this component is rendered, during the rendering itself, we are dependent upon these modules. For example, use form, which is actually coming from React hook form. And then since at this time only, we also need to provide this to-do schema. So that means if we are doing the optimization during the rendering of this component, we won't be able to optimize properly the Zod and React hook form libraries because we need those libraries during rendering of this component itself. So a better approach in this scenario would be something else. First of all, I'm gonna just revert the code that I have added in this file. Now the next thing that I'm gonna be doing is I'm essentially going to create a wrapper component for this create to do. Let me show you. I'm going to create this create to do wrapper. Okay. Now this is going to be a client component. First of all, I'm going to import dynamic from next dynamic here. And then I'm just going to import this dynamic create to do. Let's properly format this. So components create to do. And then from this component, I'm just going to return this dynamic create to do. Okay, let's talk about why am I doing something like this? Well, first of all, I know for a fact that all of these things such as Zod, React hook form, all of those things are just part of this create to do component. And if you really think about it, I do not actually need this whole create to do component as soon as my page renders, because this is something that is actually not required for initial rendering of the page. So that is why I'm wrapping this with a client component, because I need to use this dynamic function. And then I'm telling Next.js to import this component dynamically. So when I do something like this, Next.js is not going to include this component as part of the client bundle, as part of the first load.js, right? That means inside of the home page, instead of adding this create to do directly, I can remove this and I can add create to do wrapper, more like this. Now let's see if this is actually working as expected or not. If I just come here, refresh the page, you can see that this is working as expected, right? Nothing has been changed from user perspective. Okay, so just like this create to do wrapper, I'm also going to create a wrapper for this update to do. So I'm going to create another file called update to do wrapper. This is also going to be a client component. And then I'm going to import dynamic. We're going to get the update to do component. And then I'm going to pass dynamic update to do over here. And when we are using this component, we also need to provide the to do, which we want to update. And we can get the to do type from the Prisma types, as you can see over here. So now I can go to this to do list component. And within this update to do, I'm just going to use dynamic update to do, dynamic update to do. So let me get rid of this update to do from here. I'm going to import that dynamic update to do like this. All right, let's first check if this is actually working or not. I'll come here, refresh the page. Okay, so we have this. Let me show you. We are able to create the to-dos and I can click on this, update the to-do, and I can also update the to-do. I can add the description also, as you can see over here. Perfect. That means our functionality is working as expected. But at this point, if I create a build of my application, you can see that we have actually reduced the first load.js from 138 kilobytes to 103 kilobytes. And the only thing that we did is we simply created these two wrapper components, to-do wrapper, create to-do wrapper, and update to-do wrapper. Both of these are also client components because we want to use dynamic function. And then here we are importing the original create to do component, as you can see, setting the server side rendering to false, because in this case we do not need server side rendering. And then we are just returning this dynamic component out of this file. So this is my way of telling Next.js, do not make this component a part of first load.js. So by doing something like this, Next.js can load these dynamically when there is actually a need for this. Okay, we can optimize this even further. So right now we know that we are sitting at about 103 kilobytes and we came from 138 kilobytes. So this is quite a big improvement in itself. But let's say we want to go a little bit higher than that. What can we do in this scenario? Well, one of the things that we can do, so if you take a look at this to-do list component, you can see that we are using this SWR library to fetch data on the client side. So how about we remove this SWR and then use server-side data fetching? That is further going to decrease the first load.js. Let me show you. So what I'm going to be doing is inside of this to-do list component, first I'm going to remove this use client directive from the top of the file. Okay. Then I'm going to remove this SWR line. Then I'm also going to get rid of this fetcher function because we do not need this. I'm going to get rid of all of this code. And then I'm also going to get rid of this loading code because since now we'll be doing data fetching on the server side, so there is no point on having this loader at all. Okay. And then we just have this JSX over here, as you can see. Okay. And actually we can tell that this to-do is going to be an instance of to-do. So this to-do is coming from the type that we have created in the DB. Okay, so this is now a server component. So first thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to set this to an async function. And then I'm going to get the response by making a request to this API to-dos. And I'm just using this simple fetch function, okay? So if the response is not okay, I'm simply returning this diff fail to load to-dos. And if we are here, that means we can get the JSON response, and then we can get the to-dos. And for some reason, if the to-dos does not exist, we set this to an empty array. And then we are rendering these to-dos over here. Okay. So if I just show you, I refresh the page. Okay. So we actually got an error failed to pass URL from API to-dos. So I think we need to provide a full URL here. I'm just going to hard code this for now, more like this. You should not be doing something like this. Make sure you create an environment variable for this. For the purpose of this video, this is absolutely fine. So I'll come here, refresh the page. You can see that I'm able to see all of my to-dos. But the problem with this is now all of my functionality related to create to-do or even edit to-do is actually broken. Plus, I'm not even able to delete any items over here. So how can we fix that? Well, let's see. First, go to this create to-do component. I'll come here, and here I can see that this onSubmit function will be executed whenever a user tries to add a to-do. And here what we're doing is we are actually sending the data using a fetch request. And then after that, we are resetting the form. We are closing the dialog. We are mutating API to-dos route. But now we cannot use mutate because we are now not dependent upon SWR. So let's get rid of this SWR code and this mutate line also. We need to actually do a router refresh. That means we need to import use router from next navigation. Okay. And then I'm going to just create a router instance. And after this to-do has been created, I'm going to reset the form. I'm going to close the dialog, and then I'm going to refresh the router. So this is what you need to do on the client side. Okay. But this is not enough. You also need to go to your API endpoint. And in this post function, which is actually responsible for creating the to-do, after the to-do has been created, that means after the to-do has been inserted to the database, and just before returning this response, what I can do, I can actually revalidate the path. So make sure you import this revalidate path from next catch module. Okay. You can use this in case of server side only. And then I'm going to tell it to revalidate the home page. Okay. Let me explain one more time what is happening. Inside of this create to-do, we are making a request to the backend to store the to-do. The request is coming in this post function. We are doing all of the validations, storing the to-do to the database. Then we are revalidating the path, essentially telling Next.js that you should refetch the data that is present on the home page. Okay. But this is on the server side. On the client side, after we get the response, we are telling Next.js or React, you could say, to refresh the router here so that it can actually show you the latest data. Let's see if this is working or not. I'll come here, add a to-do, create, and you can see that we are getting all of the to-dos. So it is also showing all of the to-dos that we have created a little bit ago, right? Let me show you again. This is some to-do, create, right? Okay. So now create to-do is working. And similarly, I can do the same thing for edit and delete also. So let's go to this API to-dos now. I'm going to just copy this revalidate path line. And in this delete function, I can say that if the to-do has been deleted, just before returning a response, let's revalidate the path also. And similarly, when the to-do has been updated, let's revalidate the path also in this case. Okay, so we are done with the server side. We just need to do a router refresh for both delete and edit functionality. So I'll go to this delete to-do. Here we are deleting this. This is the function that we are responsible for making a delete request. Here also we are using mutate. So let me get rid of this mutate line from here. And in this one, I'm simply going to be doing router.refresh, more like this. Okay. Router.refresh. Make sure we import user router from next navigation, and we call user router to get the router instance. Okay. And similarly, we'll come to this update to-do component. I'm going to import use router. I'm going to remove this SWR line because we do not need that. Here also, I'm going to call the use router to get the router instance. And after closing the dialog, I'm simply going to do a router refresh. Okay. So just by doing it, everything should be working as expected. So let's check if the delete is working. So if I click on this, you can see that delete is working. If I click on this to-do has been updated. You can see this is also working. And if I click on this to create a to-do, you can see that this is also working. Perfect. And since we're not using SWR anymore, it's a good idea to remove that dependency altogether. Okay. Now I'm going to make a build of our project to see how much of a improvement that we got. So you can see that right now we are sitting at about 98.2 kilobytes. So we started from 138 kilobytes and now we are sitting at 98.2 kilobytes. Pretty amazing. Also, one more thing, if I start the production version of my application, now at this point, this create to do and edit to do is not part of the initial client bundle. That means these are being loaded separately, right? So if I go to network tab, choose the slowest 3G option available and test this out. Let's see how long this takes to actually load all of these respective components. So you can see that initial skeleton is right here with all of these options. But then this edit and create to do is taking a little bit of time to actually render. Now do keep in mind that we are doing this in the slow 3G. This is like the slowest speed possible. So even in this is actually loading pretty fast. But we can actually improve the user experience a little bit in this scenario also. And just to give you an example, we can go to this create to do wrapper. And when we are actually loading this component dynamically, we also have this loading property available to us, which expects you to pass a callback function. And then this callback can actually return a loading UI, as you can see, right? So when you do something like this, Next.js is instantly going to show a loading UI. Let me show you. You can see the loading indicator is here. That means user will get the feedback that something is happening. And then as soon as this appears, you can see that loader disappears. Perfect. So in this video, we saw how can you use different strategies, like how would you think if you want to reduce the first load.js, and then how can we fetch data on the client side, which further improves the performance of your application. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of ways we can do further improvements, but that is not the purpose of this video. That's all for this video. If you found this video valuable in any way, do like and subscribe to my channel. I'll catch you in the next one.